Namaskar and welcome to Indian Diplomacy, show on Doordarshan, India's national broadcaster, about Indian foreign policy, India's international relations, and India's engagement in various initiatives that make the world a better place. Viewers, in this episode, we are taking a close look at the profession of diplomacy, the way it has evolved, the Indian Foreign Service, which is the crux of Indian diplomacy, and the changes that we have seen in the Indian Foreign Service over the decades, the challenges that lie ahead for the Indian Foreign Service, and what it is to be a Foreign Service officer. To discuss this, I am greatly privileged to introduce you to one of the doyens of Indian diplomacy, Ambassador Lakshmi Puri.
Pleasure to be here.
Ambassador Puri was India's ambassador to Hungary and Bosnia-Herzegovina. She has held very high-level positions in multilateral institutions of the UN system, including UN Women, the UN Conference on Trade and Development, and she's also been a well-known writer and thinker on international and national issues. Ma'am, welcome so much to Indian Diplomacy.
My pleasure to be here, and I want to congratulate you on this show because it is really become a hub of diplomatic discourse and projection of India's diplomatic endeavors and successes. So,
thank you.
I really congratulate you on that.
Thank you so much, ma'am. So, you joined the Indian Foreign Service in 1974, and you've written a chapter in a book about Delhi University, 100 years, glorious years, talking about the decision to join the Foreign Service. Especially our young viewers would be keen to know how you took this choice, how you came down this path, because I read in the chapter that you were initially destined for a career in science or in medicine, but instead you took the humanities and opted for the Foreign Service because you said because of your father's persuasion, and also something you saw that the good work that India was doing in our neighboring country Nepal at the time in the 1970s. So please tell us about that moment when you opted for the Foreign Service, and what was the ideation behind this choice?
Well, once my path had been set that I am going to join the Foreign Service, I was obsessed, I would say, with the idea of the premier service, first of all, a noble profession, and one that will enable me to serve my country, to represent my country, and literally and metaphorically fly the flag of India abroad. So that was in itself a very edifying idea, and that of course drove me. Then there was this, there is one of our colleagues had said at an interview, UPSC interview, why do you want to, he was asked why do you want to join Foreign Service, and he said that I want to combine patriotism with living abroad. But in my case, it was very much about, first of all, nationalism and serving the country, being out there in the global battlefield to defend India's interests and also to advance it. But also I was very fascinated by different cultures, different countries, and exploring the world. Of course, that's what Foreign Service enables you to do, all continents, and that's something also which was very attractive. And then there is this idea that I got that we as diplomats would be able to engage. It will be one of the most intellectually challenging and stimulating professions, because you meet the best of politicians,
world,
academics, artists, scientists, media persons. So it's a very rich intellectual universe that you inhabit when you, and then it's a question of also, there is this, even at that time one was starry-eyed about making history, even in bites, if you will say, because maybe one would be able to change in small doses some relationships,
Yes.
enhance India's image, influence opinions, and even change its destiny in relation to the world, in relation to the countries you are dealing with. So that idea again,
A sense of agency to
sense of
bring about
agency.
historical change for a
Absolutely.
developing country that was slowly
that
growing
was
at the time. Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. So it was that, I would say, the romance of that, the idealism of that was very inspiring. And we were in a time which is, this generation, our generation, had not seen British colonialism, but we were very much fired up to put our own imprint, our own genius, the imprint of our own genius on foreign policy. So
Absolutely.
that fire was certainly there. And
And ma'am, I also read that you were number 2 in the UPSC list for that year 1974, and one of the very few women who was in diplomacy at that time. Now we have many more following your trailblazing success. So people would like to know how competitive was the UPSC in those days, almost 50 years ago, because now we have millions of people,
True.
taking a shot, and
True.
they're just like 30, 40 or so who get into the foreign service every year. And how much did you study, and how hard was it to actually crack the exam? Because you talked about your father warning you that you got to be really, really at your best to be able to make it.
no, absolutely. I think it was, for those times, it was very competitive. I think 1.5 lakh people got through the first round, and then out of that year where I got into foreign service, 25 people were taken in, which is rare. Normally only 6, and always the top first, the first 6 or first 10 or first 15 would be taken in.
The
But
rank
that
holders,
year,
yeah.
rank holders. So it was a very coveted profession within the overall All India Services exam. My journey was that I was determined that I would not wait to finish my MA. My father had we had strategized together that I will appear for it immediately after BA. So that had its challenges. And for today's youth who are planning to join the services, I would say that at that time, history was the subject I had chosen. So it covered a lot of the papers in the upper and lower papers at that time. And so I was able to cover it through the education, through my college education, but I still needed help. And I went to then Vilayatan's academy for doing IR, International Relations and International Law, which
those were your subjects.
Those were also my subjects, apart from a number of history papers. So, and also I think those days we didn't have Google Baba, we did not have capsuled knowledge. So I used to spend both between my home, I had a fantastic library. My father was a book lover like no other, and we had a fantastic library at home, and a certain upbringing that made us love books. And then at IIPA library, I used to spend long hours from morning till evening, lock myself in, studying different subjects, philosophy, political science, economics, not always related to the papers I was going to appear for. So that was, I think, a very big plus in my game, and very focused.
And these days, ma'am, one
singular in my pursuit.
Yeah. No, so the humanities and social sciences, logically speaking, should be the foundation for the foreign service. But these days, you also find a lot of people from,
Even
engineering and science.
Even those days, we had doctors, we had engineers. In fact, the person who stood first was a nuclear scientist. So
Right.
there are different paths to this, but mine was a humanities path.
Right. Now, ma'am, going to your career, you served in our mission in Japan. You represented India on our policy vis-a-vis neighboring countries in South Asia. You were ambassador in Europe. So, if you look at your career and the trajectory and the pathway, how did you approach your job, and what were the directives coming from headquarters from Delhi, and what is the role of the officers in the mission abroad, and what is the link between the two, and do our diplomats or were our diplomats in those days able to take decisions of their own, or if so, at what level? And I'd like you to talk about the policy making process, ma'am, because most people don't know exactly what happens between headquarters and the missions and the back and forth, and how we formulate policy.
Diplomacy requires both a generalist's understanding of issues and the negotiating tactics and strategies, but it also requires a specialist's understanding, in-depth understanding of specific issues, and that's what one had to do throughout my career, particularly when I was as a delegate in the multilateral space, in the UN, in Geneva twice, all the UN projects of peace and security, disarmament, human rights, particularly human rights, ILO, WHO, all the agencies, and intellectual property rights. I mean, the range of issues one had to specialize in. So, that is also the excitement of it. Now, your question about
policy formulation.
But just before that, let me just come to two other issues or two other assignments which I would like to highlight. One was when I was Under Secretary Pakistan. Firstly, a woman being an Under Secretary Pakistan was kind of sticking it into the Pakistanis, which was a very misogynist establishment. So, and I was seen as a hawk. At that time, there was this thing about hawk, and are you a dove or are you a hawk? So, I was seen very much as a very strong upholding India's positions, etc. So, that was now a hardcore portfolio, and as desk officer I had so much agency to shape policy upward, to prepare the ground for policy making upward. And I used to even participate. Those days Mrs. Gandhi was the Prime Minister, Narasimha Rao was the Foreign Minister. I used to participate even in Mrs. Gandhi's conferring with the military and intelligence, and so one had that kind of one wouldn't say access, but that kind of ingress into policy making and input into policy making, as much as learning as we went along. And then I would say Sri Lanka is another example where, again, hardcore. I don't think there is any other posting that we could have. It's once in a lifetime kind of posting that was there, because it combined everything that a diplomat can expect to be engaged in. It was human rights, it was humanitarian, it was dealing with non-state actors at different
and national
levels.
Security also, India's
national security, but also peace, establishing, brokering a peace agreement, and all that it meant, leading up, preparing the peace actors, preparing the war actors, So, it was really one of, and I was fortunate to be part of then the High Commissioner Mani Dikshit's team. So, the policy was very much dynamic interaction between headquarters and the High Commissioner.
Right.
It was really one of those daily interaction almost. But in many cases, I have seen in multilateral areas, it was very much about ideas entrepreneurship and policy entrepreneurship at the local at the mission level. Many times we never got any instructions. Many times we invented instructions in order to push ahead with our national. We defined national interest. But there were many times, and then when you are doing multilateral, you get instructions from different ministries.
Right.
You are engaged with different ministries. When I was dealing with World Intellectual Property Organization, I used to get instructions from the industry ministry or trade ministry when I was dealing with UNCTAD. So it depends on that, but there is a very healthy, I would say, balance between what headquarters decides and what the mission perceives and recommends and drives. And it has to be that, because you have to make an assessment of the local dynamics and the politics and what position we should therefore take in that context.
Absolutely.
So it's a very
it's a kind of like a co-creation of
co-creation.
Process.
Absolutely.
Ma'am, coming to multilateral, you have been you've held top positions in the UN system, many agencies and offices, and I quote from your book chapter on the Delhi University, where you say that in intergovernmental diplomacy, the qualities that are required of a diplomat, you say analytical temperament, responsiveness, preparedness, mental stamina, consensus building skills, and daring do. So multilateralism today, if you reflect on it, is in a deep crisis. There are many people who have become very skeptical of the UN and it's not delivering. You yourself have written a very constructively critical piece about the role of the UN vis-a-vis the Ukraine war and whether they could have done more and why they couldn't do it. So I'd like you to reflect on these attributes that you're talking about. I suppose they still hold, they are for all time.
Absolutely.
But in the current era where multilateralism is in crisis, if our diplomats are holding major positions in the UN system and elsewhere, how should they approach, and what do you think is required to revive multilateralism, and what is the role of individual diplomats? Because it looks like there's a big system and there are structural weaknesses and flaws and they're not able to deliver.
Yeah.
And people are, that's why, becoming disillusioned with international institutions. So your thoughts on what is the role of diplomats in multilateralism?
So let me begin by recalling that when I moved from my Pakistan portfolio and went to Geneva and started working on disarmament and human rights, initially I felt very frustrated because it was all about resolutions which people saw as soft law and which was not really implementable or implemented. So what was the purpose, and hours of discussion around that in a multilateral forum. So I went to my then permanent representative and shared my frustration with him, Muchkund Dubey, Professor Muchkund Dubey. And he is the giant, he is really the Maharathi and I would say of multilateral diplomacy and in every area. So I went to him and he said, you have to believe in the power of ideas to change the world.
Wow.
So keep faith. You never know, the seeds that you sow today will bear fruit, maybe in 5 years, maybe in 10 years. Yes, the system today is broken and all three parts of that system, the government's intergovernmental part, where there is the world is divided, is riven. Then there is the secretariat. The secretariat must pull its weight, must be unbiased, it must have the credibility to drive the different actors.
And be more creative.
And be more technically qualified and creative. So that aspect has to be always kept up in a very evolving agenda, because there is a fifth project of humanity today, and that is Tech 4.0.
Yes.
That is shaping, I mean, it's a shape-shifting kind of force today. So that also needs to be governed. So there are so many different challenges, existing challenges, whether it's climate change or, and to be fair to the UN, to be fair to the multilateral system, given the limitations, they are trying to do their best.
Whatever they can.
Yes, but as I said, the other two, and the third part is we the people. You know, the media, the civil society and all of that. So the three have to work together. Now, the role of diplomats in that context, they have to, of course, try to use the margins of persuasion to bring these three elements together. And I have always seen that. You know, one of my, I would say, achievements or milestones that I can think of is organizing the first ever head of state and government level event on gender equality, for making commitments on gender equality. We put together more than 70 heads of state and government, the first time in the history of the world. So, you know, you have to, that's why the daring do.
Yeah.
You have to think
Initiative,
big.
yeah.
So, I would say to all the multilateralists, think big, be ambitious, and can do, have a can do attitude. Try and then work backwards. This is my goal. How do I go about it? Then you have to do a lot of jugaad. You have to get the countries together. You have to have issue-based coalitions. You have, and this is what we have done. And what has changed, I think, today from where we were, we used what has been called the power of argument. The argumentative Indian, we excelled in it, and we really played well above our league.
Punching, yeah.
Our league in multilateral areas. But today we are increasingly playing, you know, with the argument of power.
Yes.
So in that context, today's diplomats, Indian diplomats, have that additional heft which we didn't have.
You made do with when we were poor and quote unquote backward.
Yes.
And today India is rising.
Yeah.
And
So it was the brilliance of our you know, brilliance of our eloquence of our you know, talk, or the logic of our argument, or you know,
lot of persuasion.
So
Ma'am, coming to the current generation of the foreign service, Prime Minister Modi has advised them to, I quote him, to think and plan long term for the next 25 years and play a vital role for the growth of the country. And he has been emphasizing that our IFS officers, officer trainees should focus on trade and commerce, technology, innovation, environmental issues, cultural diplomacy, all these things. And I think he wants them to move in a more specialized direction than was the case before, and for them to develop a niche and an expertise much more than before, because the issues are also becoming more and more complex. So your thoughts on the current day IFS and the future of the IFS, what are the things they should focus on to make to meet our grand national goals set by Honorable Prime Minister for us to become a developed country by 2047 and also a leading power in the world?
Firstly, this is a historic moment for India, and the foreign service, the diplomats of today have the great opportunity to take forward the dream, to help realize the dream of a Shresth Bharat, Mahan Bharat, and India's move from a major power to a great power, a leading power, and the target of 2047 in, you know, through the Amrit Kal. And also, you know, people are talking about India's decade, India's century.
Yeah.
So we need diplomats that will deliver, that will articulate that will define India's decade and century. Because what is diplomacy today? It's about narrative setting, it's about, and not only narrative setting vis-a-vis other foreign ministries or political systems. It's also about narrative setting with the corporate world. It's about narrative setting with the technology world.
And the global public opinion
and the global public opinion, we the people. So that is and Prime Minister Modi is the first Prime Minister to have set this goal of
leading power,
greatness,
a
leading power and greatness, India's to India becoming a great power. So that is the context in which, and indeed today we will need many more specialists and then a larger strategic vision, but also specialists to feed into that overall
grand strategy, right,
as we go forward.
So viewers, what we have learned from this enriching conversation with Ambassador Lakshmi Puri is that there are some traits of diplomacy that always remain like the gold standards, and diplomats are always required to pursue certain goals. But then with changing times, especially third decade of the 21st century, the challenges and the needs are quite different from what was the case during the Cold War or the immediate post-Cold War era. So constantly the profession has also had to adapt and adjust to these big challenges. And for Indian Foreign Service, the goal really is to uphold the national objective of becoming a developed country and a leading power in the world. And every action, every strategy, every policy that our foreign service officers take at the micro level should add up ultimately to this larger macro goal. And I want to thank Ambassador Lakshmi Puri for not just being here, but for inspiring millions of young people, especially Indian women, to take up professional careers in public service, especially the foreign service. Thank you, ma'am, for your glorious service to the nation and for all these words of wisdom.
I may just add, thank you very much. I may just add at the end that I would encourage all young people to join this grand project, and I really think that this is one of the best professions in the world, and the foreign service, the Indian Foreign Service is also entering its Swarnakal.
The golden era of Indian foreign policy lies ahead, and the foreign service has to take this great responsibility forward, says Ambassador Lakshmi Puri. Viewers, thank you for watching, and yes, diplomacy is worth pursuing. I'll see you again next time. Until then, take care.